Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Strong. I am a biblical scholar, an author, a musician, and a Noahide, which means I am a non Jew that follows the law of Moses, or at least the parts that are applicable to me. And today, I'm going to be looking at divine reward in Judaism. So within Judaism, there is, heaven and hell and so on. But really, the ultimate reward, the ultimate goal, is something called Olam Haba, which is the world to come. And so essentially, after our world kind of concludes and wraps up, we're going to be transitioning into the world to come, which is a state of reward and bliss. Okay, and within Judaism, there's a really big emphasis on preparing yourself for Olam Haba, you know, doing enough good deeds and so on to merit getting into Olam Haba and so on. And, that's what I'm going to be exploring today. So, in this video, I'm going to start off with some Jewish sources on reward. I'm going to be talking about the importance of the commandments. I'm going to be sharing some Kabbalistic viewpoints. And then finally, I'll be talking a little bit about what you can do. So, what I'm going to be sharing in this video has been the result of a lot of reading and a lot of contemplation. And I think and I hope that, for the Noahides watching this video, or Jews, or even Christians, what I'm going to share in this video, I hope it's helpful. It takes a lot of thinking and contemplation to arrive at this. At least it did for me. So, yeah, hopefully this is helpful. So anyway, let's start off with the Jewish sources on divine reward and divine punishment. So it's a principle of faith in Judaism that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. So this is principle number 11 in the 13 principles of faith. And in the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides says that the goodness which is in store for the righteous is the life of the world to come. Okay, and he cites a verse from Deuteronomy. So reward and punishment is a fundamental aspect of Jewish faith. It's a fundamental aspect of biblical belief. But let's dive into this a little bit further. Okay. So in the Mishnah Torah, also in the section on repentance, Maimonides says that God gave us this Torah, which is a tree of life. Whoever fulfills what is written within it and comprehends it with complete and proper knowledge will merit the life of the world to come. A person merits a portion of the world to come according to the magnitude of his deeds and the extent of his knowledge. Okay, so, when you look at how the rabbis and sages talk about world to come, about Olam Haba, they say that, you get a portion of it. And the size of your portion is proportionate to your good deeds and your righteousness and so on. Okay, so, the thinking here is that more righteousness, more good deeds, larger portion. Okay? Now, the Vilna Gaon says that every word of Torah is a mitzvah in itself, and in a couple of minutes a person can accumulate hundreds of mitzvos of Torah learning. Okay, so this also is almost like a quantifiable thing, right? The more you do, the more you get. Okay, so that's like a theme that you'll find throughout Jewish literature is the more you do, the more you get. Okay, it's almost like a mathematical thing. Now, Chabad.org, also talks about reward and punishment in terms of judgment and accounting. Okay, and the word accounting itself implies, that there's a quantifiable nature to our good deeds and our righteousness. Okay, heaven somehow quantifies this and, gives us a proportionate reward. Okay, so if you read these sources and, listen to what some of the rabbis are saying, I think it's possible to get caught up in almost like the counting of things, like the counting of good deeds and so on, right? Like that's something that I've fallen prey to is you know trying to count or quantify the reward for things. Um, and in all fairness, like based on what's out there in Jewish literature, we become kind of accustomed to thinking about things in terms of size of reward and so on. Okay. Now, when it comes to what's written about the commandments, okay, in books like Path of the Just, we find, again, we find that the world to come is the focus, and the way to get to the world to come is to follow the commandments. Okay, and the reason that we're placed on this earth is to perform the commandments and therefore prepare ourselves for the world to come. Okay, now when we dive a little bit deeper into this and start thinking about this in a little bit more of a nuanced way, we find sources like Rabbi Chaim Volosin saying the actions themselves constitute the reward in Olam Haba. After the soul departs from the body, it rises to take pleasure and satisfaction with the light, energy, and worlds of holiness that have been added and multiplied by good actions. Okay, so Olam Haba is made up of the actions of the person, and same with the punishment of Gehenna. The sin itself is the punishment. Okay, so again, you know, the thinking might be, perform more commandments, be more righteous, gain a larger portion, right? So there's almost like a mathematical aspect to it. And there is, right? However, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share some Kabbalistic viewpoints. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour into Kabbalah to understand some of the nuances here. Okay? So in some of my other videos, I've talked about the purpose of creation. And basically, the purpose of creation is for God to share himself with created beings like ourselves. Okay, so in Kabbalah, God is referred to as the Or Ein Sof, or infinite light. Our world is kind of an illusory world. It's a finite material realm. Okay, and God basically hid his own light to give us room for free will. Okay, and then we're put into the world to discover and embody divinity. Okay, and through our free will actions here in this world, we gain merit that we'll enjoy in Olam Haba. Okay, now if we dive a little bit deeper into this concept, we find that our world is kind of like a video game or an illusion. In Olam Haba, there will be nothing but God's presence. Okay? And the degree to which we become godly determines the degree to which we can enjoy God's presence. And so, from this perspective, the reward is less of a scoreboard and more of a natural consequence of who we become. And that's what the rabbis mean when they say that the actions themselves are the reward. The sin itself is the punishment. Okay, it's who you become throughout your life, which is either the reward or the punishment. Okay? Now, if we stop and just kind of meditate on this a little bit, okay? In Deuteronomy, there's a phrase that says Ein od milvado, or there is nothing but God. Okay? And so the idea that we are separate from God, that we are, separate beings, is kind of an illusion. Okay? We're actually sparks of God. Jews and non-Jews are all sparks of God. Okay? And the commandments are really just, guidelines or expectations for us to either embody godliness or not embody godliness. Okay, the more commandments that you do, the more righteous you become, the more you rectify your character traits, the more like God you are becoming. Okay, and therefore, in Olam Haba, where there's no illusion, okay, the degree to which you will be able to tolerate and accept the divine light, the Or Ein Sof, the degree to which you can accept it is entirely dependent on how much like that thing you are. Okay? So for someone, say, who's wicked, okay, it's going to be like oil and water. Okay? They just simply couldn't exist in, you know, God's presence because they are so unlike it. Okay? However, for the Sadiqim, for the righteous people, okay, like Moses and Aaron and so on, and Abraham, right? They are so righteous, they are so much like God that being in Olam Haba, being in God's presence, is like second nature to them. Okay? So it's like from this angle, it's not so much like a scoreboard or a transaction in terms of if I do more of this, then I get more reward. It's not so much like that. More so, it's allowing yourself and working to become more godly. It's letting God shine through you. Okay? And that is its own reward in this life and the next. Okay? And that's something that took me a lot of contemplation to come to, because when we hear about reward and punishment, there's almost a transactional nature to it, right? But really, the deeper goal, when we look at, you know, things like Kabbalah and so on, the deeper goal is really to transform yourself and become more godly. Okay? And then by doing that, okay, by conforming to what God wants from us and developing ourselves and so on, by doing that, that is how we get a larger portion in the world to come. And really what that is, you know, as I've mentioned, is being more at home in God's unfiltered presence. Okay? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I'm not sure if I explained it as well as I'd like, but really what I would emphasize, you know, at least from my perspective, is the commandments and, you know, the rectification of character traits and all of those things. Really what they're doing is allowing God to shine through you. Okay, it's becoming more godly and godlike. Okay, and it's that transformation which is the goal. Okay, it's not so much trying to get a larger portion of Olam Haba. Really, it's about trying to transform yourself so that by the time you get to Olam Haba, it'll be like second nature. Okay? Now, in terms of things you can do, okay? One thing I wanted to mention, you know, as I've talked about, is, you know, in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, it says, do not be like servants who serve the master on the condition of receiving a reward. Rather be like servants who serve the master without the condition of receiving the reward, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. And this you know, verse in Pirkei Avot is really summing up what I've been talking about, which is the real reward is the fact that you are becoming more like the Creator who created you in His image. Okay, it's about allowing yourself to embody the image of the divine. Okay, and the reward in that sense is almost secondary. You know, it'll come to you naturally as a result of you transforming yourself. Okay, and then the question becomes, how do you transform yourself? And, you know, for that, there's the Torah, and especially Musar, okay, which is a combination of ethics and self-development. So books like Path of the Just, Ethics of the Fathers, Gate of Trust, these are the kinds of works that will allow you to rectify your character traits, pursue godliness, right, either as a Jew or a non-Jew, rectify your character traits, and so on. Okay, so that's all I really had in this video. Again, I wish I could explain it a little bit better. I'm not a rabbi, but you know, when I came across these concepts in my own meditations, I realized it might be worth sharing. So, hopefully this helps somebody. You know, and like again, to sum up, the real reward is transforming yourself to become more like God and to properly resemble the image of God that's within you. Okay? The reward and Olam Haba and everything, it's almost secondary. The real reward is, the self transformation. Okay? So, yeah, hope this was helpful. If this is the first video of mine you've watched, I've got a bunch of videos on my channel related to science in the Torah, biblical truth, some Kabbalah, and yeah. And if you want, you can buy my book, Ticket to Heaven, available on Amazon. Thank you very much.